Okay, my name is Tom Clifford. Actually, Thomas E. Clifford III. Born in Washington, D.C. Born and raised in Washington, D.C.
And what year? What's your birthday?
1929. My father was Thomas Edward Clifford Jr. Obviously, that's why I'm the third. And my mother was Clotha Spriggs Clifford. And my daddy was born in 1904. My mother was born in 1908. And that was, of course, their first marriage, and I was the only child that they had. Sadly, at my age of 9, and my daddy was only about 34 years old, he died. He was a victim of diabetes. And I think maybe back in those days they didn't have as many effective remedies for diabetes, because on my mother's side, one of her brothers was a physician, and he treated the family, of course. And I can kind of recall, even though I was only 9 years old at the time, I recalled him coming and tending to Daddy, you know. But as I said, sadly, he passed away when I was 9 years old. And I can remember when he was on his deathbed, he spoke to me and he, in effect, said, "Take care of your mother." So that then became my mantra, my challenge, and that's what I did my best to do from that day forward.
So what did your mother do?
Mother had gone from high school. She got to go through what was called in those days minor teachers college, which was available for African American women and men. So she became a teacher, and she taught as an elementary school teacher for many, many years, and became a principal. She was a principal of an elementary school for many, many years. My daddy, just to mention, my grandfather, Thomas Edward Clifford Sr., started a business there in Washington, D.C. Now, to be an entrepreneur as an African American was not the easiest thing in the world to do, but he formed a printing company. It was Thomas E. Clifford and Sons Printers. And in the house, the homestead, which still exists to this day, that my aunt lives in with one of her offspring, in the back room is a printing press, and that's where all of the necessary items, you know, the cases that held the type and so forth and so on, was all placed. And so my father, under the tutelage of my grandfather, because my father was the oldest of 11, so he then became a printer, you know, learned to print, set the type. And their business consisted considerably of the black churches, social groups, things like that, because you have to understand his clientele would be African Americans, obviously. And so I can recall almost all of the family members all learned how to work in the print shop in the back of the house, to include not only my father's brothers, but also my father's sisters. Everyone learned how to set type. And when I went to school, and I was junior high school, I even took printing as a class in junior high school. I just remember that.
It was offered.
So I even learned how to hold that thing, set the type, learn how to set it in the printing press, and then operate the press. one card at a time, getting the jobs out. But that was what my grandfather did, but he didn't just do that. He was also a mailman, but he then set up this business at home. And like I say, then that became the family business and sustained the family long after he was gone and my daddy had died. Sustained. My uncle took over, my aunts took over. Everybody worked. That was the family business. So that was a basic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Really interesting. Because mother was a school teacher, then she had me to go to the same school where she taught, which was not in the neighborhood. We had to travel some distance to get to her school where she was assigned. So I went with her to that school. It just so happened that school was only about approximately 4 or 5 blocks. We call them blocks in those days. Blocks, I would say, estimate about 2 miles north of where the homestead was, where the printing press was, where the homestead was. So I would go to school with her, and one Daddy would drive us to school. And then when school was over, let's say at 3 o'clock, then I would walk down to the homestead, the family home, and stay there. Daddy, of course, would be there doing his job, and the other brothers and sisters. Until Mother was able to leave school, she would also come down there to the house, and that's when from there Daddy would take Mother and me home. We lived, maybe 20 miles away from there approximately. So that was elementary school. One of the things that did occur in elementary school, which I can't explain exactly, is some way, somehow, I'll let you draw your own conclusion, some way, somehow, I skipped a whole grade. If I remember correctly, I don't think I had to go to the 4th grade or the 5th grade. One of those grades I didn't have to attend. And I attribute that to the fact that Mother, of course, being a teacher, she did quite a bit in educating me, teaching me, and so forth. And I think whatever tests I had to pass, I obviously was able to pass, so I moved ahead a year. So I was a year younger than my fellow classmates. Anyway, I finished Lovejoy Elementary School, and then I attended junior high school, which was close to where we lived, and went through what was called junior high. Today they call it middle school, and that was grades 7, 8, and 9th. And then from there, it was a matter of going to high school. In Washington, D.C., now we're talking about, I was born in 29, so now we're talking about early 40s when I've now reached the age of middle teens. Time to go to high school. Of course, I'm a year ahead of myself, so to speak, on age compared to my contemporaries. There were only 4 high schools in the whole city of Washington, D.C. that African Americans could go to. Because, we're a segregated society. Dunbar High School was primarily what we call an academic focus. Armstrong Technical High School was, as the name inferred, vocational technical. Cardoza High School was a business-oriented high school. And then there was a 4th high school called Phelps Vocational School, which was oriented towards vocational training. I was assigned to Dunbar High School, the academic high school, which my mother and family members had all gone to. So in high school, of course, now we're talking about grades 10 through 12, as is currently in the high school system. Every summer, I took summer school. So much so that I skipped another grade. So instead of graduating at age 18, which is typical, I graduated at age 16. And then went to the African American University there in Washington, D.C., which was Howard University, which is a very distinguished institution even to this day, very much so. In fact, just occurs to me, there's a person, a female, by the name of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is the vice presidential elect of the most recent election under President-elect Joe Biden. She's the first female ever to be a vice president elect at this point in time and prior to inauguration. Kamala Harris is a graduate of Howard University. A lot of distinguished people graduated from Howard University. As you know, in many high schools, they have ROTC programs. We know what ROTC stands for, Reserve Officers Training Corps. At Howard University, they had an Air Force ROTC program because you can have Army ROTC, you can have Navy ROTC. So anyway, I then immediately in my freshman year did join the Air Force ROTC program. Now, the reason I did that so readily, I think, is because I have to go back now. For the couple of years I was in high school, I was a participant in what was the cadet program. We had high school cadets in all of the high schools in Washington, D.C. And without going into too much detail, we had uniforms. The officers carried sabers. It was really prestigious. And what was really neat was every year in the spring of the year, let's say March, April time frame, there was a competition of all of the high school cadet corps which was then the sports stadium in Washington, D.C., which was called Griffith Stadium, famous Griffith Stadium. So I don't remember the exact number, but let's say there were somewhere around 8 or 10 white high schools. And we had 4 African American high schools. But we all got to participate in the competition, which was a matter of marching to music and going through certain drills and so forth and so on. And then there were judges that then rated us, and there were prizes handed out, first, second, third, and so forth. So all through high school, I was a cadet, I kind of enjoyed the military aspect of that. And I don't need to mention Phelps, I don't think, but I did have the distinction in my senior year at high school. The commandant of all of us in the high school cadet corps called me in one day and he said, Clifford, he says, I have a special mission for you. What I'd like to have you do is to go to the school I mentioned called Phelps Vocational High School, which was located not far from my home. He said, they don't have a cadet corps set up such as we do as Dunbar, Cardozo, and Armstrong. We'd like to establish a military unit there, I call it military cadet unit there. That was a thrill. So after school every day, I would go to Phelps before I'd go home, and then we'd train for an hour or two, whatever it took. And I was able to, in that my senior year, to devote enough time to getting the unit established that we did then compete that following spring in the Washington, D.C. competition. We didn't place first, second, or third. My guys weren't quite that sharp, but that was quite an accomplishment, of which I'm very, very proud that I had that opportunity to do. Okay, now back to Howard University. I joined Air Force ROTC. It just so happened, for whatever reason, I'm thinking maybe because we had a family business. I remember going on the trips when we delivered the job orders to the recipients or whatever. Maybe that was what got into my blood, I'll call it, from my daddy and from my grandfather. A business sense. Because at Howard, of course, I had to take all the regular courses, but then when it came time to focus, my focus was accounting. And so I loved accounting. I just loved that challenge. I loved dealing with the numbers, you know. Long story short, for my last year and a half there, part of the junior year all the way through the senior year, I did even go downtown in Washington, D.C. I sought out a CPA, certified public accountant, who happened to be African American, the only African American CPA in the whole city of Washington, D.C. And I went to his office and I said, Mr. Bostic, sir, I'd like very much, if I could, to come and work for you, and because I'm majoring in accounting up at Howard. And anyway, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, well, I don't know. I don't really need anybody to come and assist. I'm kind of recalling it a little bit. He was a little bit grumpy. I said, well, sir, please understand, I don't want to be paid. I don't want any pay. I just want the experience. Oh, well, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll give it a try. Well, as it turned out, he let me stay there and work for him for, like I say, about a year and a half. After school, I would go down to the office and work there for an hour or two before I go home. And that was quite a great experience, and which allowed me to focus on what did I want to do in life after graduation. So there were two things that I was focused on primarily. One was the accounting, to the extent that I had determined that upon graduation or sometime thereafter that I would take the necessary exams or whatever and hopefully become a certified public accountant, a CPA. That was certainly one of the things I wanted to do. That was going to be my avocation. But recall, I also was in the Air Force ROTC program, which meant that we had military instructors. And of course, in those days, this is years 1945 to 1949. So our instructors were all gentlemen, who had returned from World War II. They were experienced people. A couple of them were fighter pilots, I remember for sure. So we had that influence. Not just fighter pilots. They were Tuskegee Airmen. If anybody knows who Tuskegee Airmen are, then That's a very revered group of gentlemen who fought the war in a segregated unit, flew combat in Europe. And accomplished quite a bit. So 2 or 3 of these officers had been Tuskegee Airmen because they were pilots, fighter pilots. So that was some influence, okay? But I really enjoyed the Air Force ROTC experience. So in June of 1949, when I'm graduating from Howard University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in accounting, and my grades had been pretty decent. I graduated cum laude, not magna, not summa, but cum laude. Quite an accomplishment in terms of grade point average. But I also was designated as the single distinguished military graduate of the Air Force ROTC program. We had a full cadre of us guys in the ROTC program, but I guess because of my grades and whatever, my performance, I graduated with that distinction. Distinguished military graduate of the Air Force ROTC program. Oh, what did that give me? What that gave me was that if I were to go on active duty with the Air Force, I wouldn't go in just as a second lieutenant reserve. I would be entitled to become a regular officer. There's a distinction. Regular officer is permanent. Those are the ones for sure that are going to serve 20, 30 years. Reserve officers, 3-year tour, whatever. So there I am at age 20, 2 years ahead of myself, with a bachelor's degree in accounting, distinguished military graduate of Air Force ROTC in my hip pocket. And now what do I do next? Well, I said, well, hey, that CPA stuff can come later. Because I figured, well, one of these days I want to become a CPA, yes. And not only that, I also aspired to getting a law degree. And man, I had it figured out. CPA, law degree, woo, I'm going to have the world by, you know what I'm saying. I'm going to have it together. But I said, well, first let me go ahead and take advantage of my commission as a lieutenant in the United States Air Force and go on active duty. And I thought at that time, 3-year tour, typical, and then come back and pursue my accounting and my law degree. Well, so I entered the Air Force and they signed me as a supply officer up in New Jersey and so forth. And then I happened to get selected after approximately a year on active duty to go to what was called Air Tactical School. That eventually evolved into what's called Squadron Officer School. But in my day and age, it was called Air Tactical School. So it was a conglomeration of about, it seemed to me, if I recall correctly, maybe about 700 students. All lieutenants, some captains, lieutenants and captains from the Air Force in school down in Florida, Panama City, Florida. And so it was a matter of teaching us basics, whatever. Well, it just so happened that not only did I enter the service in September of 49, graduated September 49, but I did have a girlfriend from a couple of years. And by God, it was time to get married. So in December of 1949, I married my first wife. And so when I went on active duty, like I said, on active duty in September, then I was able to get her to join me. And so when I went to Air Tactical School that following spring down in Florida, my wife went with me. Well, again, you know, housing is not too readily available for African Americans, but there was a lady, an African American lady, who had a home and had a separate house not very far from her house that she rented out. That's what we were able to rent out. So that really was convenient, thank God, because we had to travel back and forth to the base. I don't remember the mileage, but it had to be a considerable distance. Well, it just so happened that assigned to Tyndall Air Force Base, where the school was, it was also a regular operating base with flying activities. There were 2 African American pilots assigned. One was married, Harlan Leonard. He and his wife Bunny had a couple of 3 kids. And the other one was a young fellow, but his last name was Sims. I don't remember Sims' first name, but young Sims. He was a single guy. Well, because he was single, whatever, then the wife and I said, you know, we need to have Sims come over here and have some home cooking. You know, and so frequently Sims would come after work. He would come to the house and spend the evening with us and partake of our hospitality, whatever. Sims was a pilot, huh? Sims was a fighter. Both of them were fighter pilots. Well, man, I'm telling you, hey, man, tell me about the airplanes. How does it fly? How does it? I asked a zillion questions of him. I was so curious about what made that airplane fly. How did you do it? Whatever. And he told me all about it. How to control this and that and so forth and so on. Well, God made this happen, I think, because fortuitously, that then gave me the curiosity of, this is something I may want to look into further. So much so that just prior to graduating from the 4 months school, Air Tactical School, I went down to the recruiting office there in the city, Panama City, Florida. It happened to be a Marine recruiting office. And I went in and I said, I would like to take an exam to apply for pilot training. Of course, they handle all the services, even the Marines. I sat down and they gave me a written exam to take, an examination to take. Not just an application, but an examination to take. Ooh. So let me go. Of course, I was always good at taking exams through high school and college. I just said, well, this doggone exam was asking an awful lot of questions. How do you do this and how do you do that? Having to do with airplanes. Thank the Lord, Sims had told me as much as he had. I was able to answer those questions, so much so that after the exam was over, they graded it. I passed the exam. That application then was obviously sent to the United States Air Force headquarters for consideration for me to go to pilot training. Well, so I got back to my unit, and then a couple of months later, here comes orders. Flying training. And that started me on my journey to become a pilot. This is an F-106 Delta Dart.
Beautiful.
It's an interceptor. You have tactical fighters, you have fighter bombers, reconnaissance planes, different categories of planes. The mission for this airplane was air defense. You have to realize now, I'm talking about the years of early 50s. We haven't been too long after World War II. And the major concern for the United States was Russia. And that's who we're trying to defend against, because that was where the big threat was. So we had to have planes that were able to go up and intercept any foreign bombers, Russian bombers, coming to attack the United States of America. Well, when I first got assigned after pilot training, I was flying a plane called an F-94s. And then following that, I flew what was called the F-89s. And then after the F-89s, I was able to transition into what was called an F-102, made by Convair. F-102 was a single-engine jet airplane similar to this, but then it was followed by this airplane. This was made by Convair. This is the F-106 Delta Dart. It's a single-engine, afterburner jet fighter, interceptor, single cockpit, one place cockpit. This airplane is a Mach 2 fighter. Mach 1 is the speed of sound, approximately 700 miles per hour. Mach 2 is about 1,400 miles per hour. This airplane, to my knowledge, as best I understand and still maintain, have been told, is the only airplane, single-engine airplane, to attain Mach 2. Most of the other airplanes, we have a lot of airplanes that go faster than the speed of sound, like the other I've flown, have two engines. This is the only single-engine airplane made by any country in the world to attain the speed of Mach 2.
It's so skinny, they call it the Dart.
And
it's so thin, narrow, they call it the Dart.
It's called the Dart because, the Delta Dart.
Delta.
Delta is because of the shape of the wings. That's the Delta Dart. Beautiful. That was, I'm telling you, all of us guys who got a chance to fly the Dart, to this day, every year, they assemble. I just can't go anymore. I'm a little too old to get around. But they have a reunion every year somewhere. I think this year it's in Florida. Last year it was in Texas. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Us Delta Dart pilots, man, we know we're special. We know darn well we're special, baby. So that was really, really my favorite. But then, as time went on, after I flew the Delta airplanes, where I was at George Air Force Base, and then I got to go to Europe, Germany, and whatever. Then it just so happened the Vietnam War came along, in the 60s. And I volunteered. I was a colonel by that time, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam. Just briefly, along the way, I was fortunate enough to have been selected by the Air Force. This is after I just finished flying when I was flying these airplanes at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California. I got orders one day to attend George Washington University, which is located in Washington, D.C., to acquire a master's degree. It was an Air Force Advanced Management Program that had been set up by the Air Force with the university for Air Force officers to get a master's degree. It was a one-year intensive program. And 52 weeks, 53 semester hours. We worked hard, no breaks. Well, I did pretty good at Air Force Advanced Management Program because upon graduation, I've got to mention this because, accomplishments are very important. The requirement was that we had 17 3-semester hour how every course is so many semester hours. So 17 3-semester hour courses. The requirement for graduation was that you had to, let me back up a little bit. The grading system was E, S, or U. E for excellent, S satisfactory, U unsatisfactory. You had to have at least, out of the 17 courses, at least 2 E's to complete your master's degree, MBA degree, Master's of Business Administration degree. And I remember, about 2/3 of the way through the program, one day one of the professors came in and said, "Need to chat with you fellas." We happened to be all males in the course. And he said, "It just so happens we're getting now into our final phase, and 2 of our members, if I had to remember correctly, I said class size was maybe about 30, approximately 30. 2 of our members have not yet earned 2 E's each. So what I'm proposing and suggesting and asking of you fellows is if any of you would want to consider surrendering your E to help them, I said, by all means. I had a bunch of E's. And a couple of my buddies, that I used to fly with. And yeah. That was to get those 2 guys through, to make sure they got those 2 E's to get through. The other thing that I remember during that year of schooling was 1 or 2 of the courses were accounting courses. Man, I got a degree in accounting. The professor, I shouldn't say his name, professor, I know his name too. He just, this is my assessment. He just wasn't that good a teacher. He made it a little, he just wasn't that sharp in my opinion. I was being very critical of him because that was my specialty, accounting, So what I did was, after class was over, whatever, I let any of the guys there, anybody need a little extra help with accounting because you're having a little trouble getting through Dr. Eaton's course, let me know. So I did a lot of tutoring. I was helping these guys. Man, here's where you blah, 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 blah. That was fun. I enjoyed that. So anyway, comes the 1 year is over, time for graduation, and what was kind of interesting was how many E's did you get, You had to have at least 2. There were 17 courses, 17 times 3 is 51 semester hours. I had given up 1, but I still ended up with 13. There were only 2 people who had more than me. One was a guy named Jim Hardinger. He was a fellow pilot, because a lot of these guys weren't rated, but he was a fellow pilot, and he and I used to go out on weekends to get our hours, because you always have to maintain your flying. So Jim Hardinger. And there was we had an Israeli officer who was in our program. He was the only non-American who was in our program. And he also acquired about about 13 or 14 E's. And Jim, my flying buddy, had about 13 or 14 E's. So we were kind of the top three, you know. Pretty proud of that. Just one little side note. This Jim Hardinger I'm talking about, he and I, like I said, used to go out in a T-33 and get our flying hours in to maintain our, you know, competence in flying. You had to get so many hours every month. You had to fly a minimum amount of hours in the Air Force. He then eventually became a 4-star general in the United States Air Force and was commander-in-chief of NORAD, the North American Air Defense System. That was old Jim Hardinger, my flying buddy.
Nice.
Well, see, now I have to go.
No, just that weekend.
Yeah, but I have to give the background why that happened. It just so happened.
Jim's white.
It just so happened before I even attended this school, just prior to going to this 1-year MBA program I mentioned, I had been at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California, flying the F-102 and the 106s. Just prior to that, I was at Oxnard Air Force Base in California, where I had flown F-89 aircraft. But also at Oxnard Air Force Base, about a year after I arrived there from an assignment in Alaska, the commander and the operations officer asked me, or told me, that they'd like to have me set up an instrument school for all of our pilots who were in that command. And the command covered Nevada, California. That's where our units were. Because our job was air defense for the western part of the United States. We had some up north. We had a division up there. But this was our division was in the southeast. And we had about 4 Air Force bases. So every year you have to get requalified every year in instrument flying, instrument training, especially for us because we were air defense people. And by that I mean it didn't make any difference if you couldn't see outside the cockpit because of the clouds or the weather or whatever. You flew anyway because you had instruments that you went by. So instrument training was very, very important for interceptor pilots. So they gave me a free hand to set up an instrument school at Oxnard to cover all of the pilots within that air division. Like I say, 4 bases. I got myself some orders and went down to Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. Went through the Air Force Instructor Pilot School, where they taught you how to become an instructor pilot in instruments. Graduated there, which was an extra credential. Came back with the help of a couple of folks, made training aids and so forth that we would use in the classroom. And then, like I said, every week, pilots, based upon usually their birthday time, would have to come to spend a week in school where we go through ground school, like in the morning, for example, 3-4 hours of ground school, teaching them about instruments and about radar, blah, 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 all of the things you have to do, instruments and whatever. And then the other part of the day would be spent in the cockpit in a 2-seat airplane. You have an instructor pilot in the front seat, and in the back seat of the T-33 trainer jet is the student, the pilot who's going to try to get his qualification. His cockpit is hooded. He can't see out. We've got a cloth hood that shields him from seeing out. So we taxi out. The pilot in the front, IP, me, and I had 3 other guys I assigned as IPs with me. We were the 4 instructor pilots. You're in the front cockpit, you take off, and then as soon as you get airborne and bring your gear up, then you say, you got it. Then he flies the rest of the mission using only reference to instruments. Blind flying, strictly instruments. And we'd put him through all sorts of things that he'd have to do. Have to go out and make intercepts, have to do aerobatics, various maneuvers, and then be able to make landings using GCA, ground control approach, and also instrument landing system. So that was really a tremendous challenge, and just to have been selected. I'm the only African-American pilot in the whole unit, and I got selected to set up the school, and we ran a good school and did everything well, obviously. Anyway, so I had that extra skill set. So going to the question that Larry brought up, when I'm at the Industrial College at the master's program, getting my master's degree, and I told you I was flying with this guy, Jim Hardinger, because we happened to be fellow pilots and we hit it off. Both, he'd been air defense, I was air defense. So we'd go out, once a month to go get our flying hours. And I remember the very first mission that he and I had together. It was on a weekend, Saturday, because school was Monday through Friday. And we went out to Andrews Air Force Base there in Washington, D.C., where the president's airplane is located. And we got a T-33, 2-seater airplane, same one I'd used for training. And he happened to be front seat. I was in the back seat. And all the planes were equipped with a hood you could use if you wanted to. And we took off and we followed a flight plan to fly from Andrews Air Force Base there in Maryland to Los Angeles. Of course, we had to stop a couple refueling stops along the way, a couple. So we take off, we go, and I don't remember exactly why we did it, but anyway, I chose to put the hood on and to fly just by instruments. And so I flew most of the way out here on instruments. He's just sitting there riding, Jim is a pretty proud individual. We landed someplace along the way. I don't know, might have been all the way out here in California. He said, "Hey, man, I just wanted to let you know, damn you good." I cracked up. He didn't know my background or what I had done, before. He said, "Damn you good. You better believe I was good, babe," Anyway, that was always a really neat compliment coming from Jim. He was impressed.
Nice. Tell me about Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, okay. Now, so master's degree, when I completed that, I got assigned to Germany. A staff job, my first staff job in Germany at headquarters, United States Air Force in Europe, which was stationed at Wiesbaden Air Base in Germany. And that was really neat for me because now I've got an MBA in management, and I was assigned in the controller's office to do what was essentially management type things. I won't go into all the details about it, but it was really a wonderful challenge. And so at the completion of those 3 years, 3-year assignment there at Wiesbaden Air Force Base, I got assigned to the Pentagon, my first assignment to the Pentagon. And there I got assigned, it just so happened I ended up in a job at the Department of Defense level. As you know, you got Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, all in the Pentagon. But on top of that, you got the Department of Defense itself, the headquarters. I was assigned to one of the Department of Defense offices in kind of a management type job, which was really, really a tremendous challenge. And so I was there approximately 2 years, as I recall. I don't remember exactly. And then out of the clear blue sky, I got orders from the Air Force to attend the prestigious Industrial College of the Air Force, which is located at Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. Also at Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. is the National War College. So you have the National War College and the Industrial College of the Air Force, both joint professional schools for military officers. By that I mean, at that point in time, you know, we're at the rank of lieutenant colonel, most of us lieutenant colonel level, Navy commander level. The class of Industrial College of the Air Force, we call it ICAF, 1/4 of the class, Army officers. 1/4, Navy/Marine officers. 1/4, Air Force officers. And the other 1/4, State Department Foreign Service officers. So that was the kind of cross-fertilization we were getting, because you're interacting. And there was a 1-year course. Of course, it involved training. That's when we had to travel. You could select what part of the world you want to travel to. My selection, when we had the overseas trip, my selection was Taiwan and Philippines. That was the first time I'd been that far, you know, west in the Pacific. Before that, I'd been Alaska, but now I even had to visit those places. And we interacted with the military forces in those countries. That was really interesting. At the completion of the 1 year, and by this time I'm a full colonel, okay? Now it's a matter of what assignment would follow. Obviously, those who are coming out of ICAF as well as the National War College, they're kind of the ones that have been kind of earmarked to maybe move on up the ladder. You know, they're going to get some big assignments in the service. And I recall that a few weeks or so before graduation, I had a visit from a general officer from the Air Force who came and talked to us Air Force guys about follow-on assignments. And he was suggesting, you know, well, Clifford, I think what we have planned for you, maybe we get you to go, or we have a couple, 3 choices. I said, sir, I'm not interested in any of those. He said, well, what is it you're interested in? I said, I want to go to Vietnam. I want to go fly in Vietnam. Because the war was on. This was year 1970 when I'm in ICAF. The war in Vietnam had been there since about 65 approximately. I wanted to get back to flying. Like I said, I had back-to-back staff jobs, Germany, Pentagon. Man, I'm itching to get back in the cockpit. That's my life. So sure enough, he said, Clifford, he says, you're a full colonel now, and you got a master's degree. You finished Industrial College of the Air Force. Man, we got lots of, you know. I said, sir, please, that's what I want to do. Okay. That's what my orders were. So I finished, and I then got assigned George Air Force Base, Victorville, California, where they had F-4 training. This is where I went there to learn. Of course, most of the students, the young jocks, lieutenants, captains, majors, whatever. But there were a couple of full colonels there. In fact, in my class, there were 2 full colonels. The other one was one named Gabriel. Gabriel ended up becoming a 4-star general in the Air Force, Chuck Gabriel. And I was the other full colonel in the class. And so we got to fly the F-4 Phantom. That's called the Phantom, the F-4. So training took about, I don't know, if I had to remember correctly, about 2 to 3 months of training. Go up and learn how to fly that airplane, move it around the sky, because now you got a chance, now I'm going to go to combat. I got to know how to fight MiGs, because that's what Russia supplied to the Vietnamese. Or I have to learn how to drop bombs, and blah, 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 blah. All the things you do in a fighter bomber. That's called a fighter bomber. So that's what happened. After graduation from F-4 training, I got assigned to Da Nang Air Force Base, Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam. And because of my rank, I was assigned as Director of Operations. You have a full colonel as a commander of the wing. You have a full colonel as vice commander of the wing. You have a full colonel as Director of Operations, full colonel, Director of Logistics. Those are the top jobs in a wing. I went there as Director of Operations, but it was about, a month after that approximately, after about 1 month, the vice commander rotated back to the States, finished his 1-year tour, and I got promoted up to become vice commander. So I was the vice commander of the 366 Tactical Fighter Wing at Da Nang Air Base in Vietnam. Well, fine. My commander, my boss, wing commander, was Colonel Buzz Sawyer, good old fighter pilot. I took advantage of being there to fly as often as I could manage to do. So I flew quite a few missions because, I'm not required to fly as often as the young lieutenant and captains, but I flew often because I wanted the experience. So at the end of approximately 8 months, I'd flown 70 combat missions. And my airplane only got hit once, but it didn't bring me down. Didn't have to bail out. I was struck by ground fire. And just completed approximately, 7 months approximately. I've got 70 combat missions, and it just so happened that there was we call them dining in. There was a going away party for one of the commander colonels over in one of the bases in Thailand, because we go back and forth into Thailand frequently. And so all of the commanders, all the senior people from all the different units in Vietnam and in Thailand were invited, to these going away parties. My commander, Buzz Sawyer, would normally have gone to the party, but he was on special assignment in Saigon or someplace. So I got to go as representative for my wing. So I'm at the head table with the 3 or 4 other full colonels from other wings. It just so happened that the guest speaker was the commander-in-chief of all of the Air Force units in Vietnam. General Lavelle happened to be and consented to come there to be the guest speaker for the going-away party for that commander who was leaving. So the program went on and so forth, dining and drinking and enjoying ourselves and so forth. Came time for speech making. So the speeches were made by a couple of people, and then General Lavelle he's the main keynote speaker. And he pays tribute to the departing commander and gives us a lowdown on what's happening in the war and how we're doing and what missions we can anticipate in the future, game plan, and so forth. And then he said, and I also have a special announcement I'd like to make. So we're all sitting there. We're really tuned in. Special announcement. He says, I want you all to know that one of our members, guests here, has been selected for a new assignment. And I'm referring to Colonel Thomas E. Clifford, who has been selected to take command of a wing in Germany. Good Lord. Good Lord. You said what? Oh, wing commander. I'm going to be a wing commander. At that point in time, this is the year 1970, no African American officer in the Air Force had ever been a wing commander. Now, please understand, I am preceded by a couple of other African Americans who are senior to me. The most notable one was General B.O. Davis, who commanded the Tuskegee Airmen flying units in World War II. And he had attained the rank, so it wasn't a wing at that, it was a squadron. Smaller, World War II stuff. So General B.O. Davis then did attain the rank of 3 stars, Lieutenant General, prior to retirement. And just as a postscript to that, after retirement, he became, in the cabinet of whichever president it was, he was the head of the transportation department for the government, for the United States. And then he retired and he passed away eventually, whatever. But before he passed away, because of the efforts of Senator John McCain from Arizona and my adopted brother, Brigadier General Charles B. Jiggets, working with Senator McCain, they were able to, where the approval had to come from, Congress or executive branch, wherever it had to come from, were able to get General B.O. Davis promoted from 3 stars to 4 stars. B.O. Davis Jr.'s father was the first African American general in the Army. He attained the rank of 1 or 2 stars in the Army. This B.O. Davis, his son, Jr., B.O. Davis, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., was the second African American to attend West Point. the United States Military Academy, West Point, New York. His 4 years there at West Point, of course, this was back in the late 30s, prior to World War II. He attended West Point 36, 37, 38, somewhere in that time frame. My understanding is that his whole 4 years at West Point, he was pretty much never spoken to by all of the others. Everybody else is white. He's the only African American there. Now, there had been a black officer who preceded him at West Point. His name was Flipper. And I don't recall the details on Flipper, how far he went in the military. He didn't go very far. I mean, no big rank or anything. But B.O. Davis, that was his background. West Point in the 30s, Tuskegee Airman training at Tuskegee, Alabama. He then was the senior officer, as a lieutenant colonel. Took the unit to Italy. They flew combat, protecting the bomber escort from all the attacks over in Germany and other countries, Belgium, wherever. Came back to the States, like I said, retired as a 3-star lieutenant general, headed the Department of Transportation for the government, and retired. And then, because of the efforts of Senator McCain and my brother, they were able to get him approved for 4 stars. And that happens once in a while. You get a promotion after the fact. I think that happened, for example, I don't need to go into that. But anyway, that was really significant. But on active duty, he had only attained the rank of 3 stars. The next African-American officer who attained the rank of general officer in the United States Air Force was Daniel James, known as Chappie James. Daniel Chappie James. Vietnam, Chappie James was the vice commander of the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing at Ubon, and they were the ones that had all the notoriety back in the 60s of killing MiGs. They flew into North Vietnam and shot down a bunch of MiGs. They lost a lot of planes too, lost a lot of pilots too, but that was their notoriety. There was I'm trying to remember the name they called it. I just looked at it recently. But anyway, that was really a significant chapter during the Vietnam War. What Chappie James and his commander, he was vice commander, his commander was Colonel Robin Olds. And a lot of people know Robin Olds because he was really a dynamic fighter pilot. But he and Chappie ran that wing at Ubon there, at 8th TAC Fighter Wing. Anyway, just to carry on with Chappie, after he left Vietnam, he came back to the States. He was sent to the Pentagon as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at Defense Department level. And then subsequently, Chappie James moved up the rank structure. He was a 2-star there. He became a 3-star. And then somewhere back there in the 70s, early 70s, Chappie James was selected for 4 stars, a full general, the first African American to attain the rank of 4 stars in the United States Air Force. And he then was given command of NORAD. That was before Jim Hardinger got it. But he was NORAD commander, Colorado Springs, Colorado, where it still exists to this day. So he was the second African American to make the rank of general, but he's the first to make it to 4 stars on active duty. Then there's a gentleman by the name of Lucius Theus. Lucius Theus was non-rated, not a pilot, he didn't fly, but he attained the rank of 2 stars, a major general, and he commanded the Air Force Accounting and Finance Center, which is located in Denver, Colorado, which was a very prestigious assignment. Lou Theus, great guy, great guy. He was the 3rd African American to attain the rank of general officer in the United States Air Force. And then there's a guy, first name is Tom, who attained the rank of general in the United States Air Force. He was the 4th African American to attain the rank of general officer in the United States Air Force. Thomas E. Clifford III. I was the 4th, baby.
Yeah, really 4th.
But I just want to mention, just briefly, I won't go much further. I told you, I mentioned the name Charles B. Jiggets, who assisted Senator McCain to get B.O. Davis's 4th star. Chuck Jiggets, we call him Chuck. Chuck Jiggets was a single offspring, no brothers or sisters. Just like I was a single offspring, no brothers and sisters. He's a couple of years older than me, so much so that in World War II, he got caught up in the draft. He was old enough to go. I wasn't old enough to go. You know, I'm only 16 when I finished high school, but he was older. So he did get into World War II a little bit, you know, until the war was over in 1945. So I went to Howard in 45. He then came to Howard in 46. That's when we got to know one another. And so I knew him all the way through Howard University. And then he also was in Air Force ROTC program. And he then went into the service also. And we became very close. In fact, when we were in Alaska, we were assigned to Alaska at the same time. He was at one base, I was at the other, but, you know. We adopted one another as brothers. So our name for one another was Bruz, B-R-U-Z. He's my bruz, I was his bruz. Well, I'm going to tell you about old Chuck Jiggets. He wasn't a pilot, but he was what we called in those days an RO, a radar observer. That was the guy that sat in the back seat of a two-seater air defense type airplane and assisted the pilot in attacking. Like I say, we have a lot of two-seat airplanes where the one guy in the back handles the radar and the electronic gadgets and so forth. The pilot flies up front, like the F-4, for example. Anyway, Bruz also attained the rank of general officer. He was the 7th to attain the rank of general officer as an African American in the United States Air Force. Pretty proud of that.
I think, is he the one that pinned you? Was Bruz the one that pinned your star?
Oh, no.
Tell me who pinned your star?
When I got pinned, let's see, When I got pinned the first time, it was when I had, like I said, I got assigned from Vietnam to go command a wing in Germany. That was the year 1971. And I got there to Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany in December 71. Activated the wing. The wing had been, we call the wing dormant, had been inactive. They reactivated the number, 52nd Attack Fighter Wing at Spangdahlem. We're a fighter base. I had 2 fighter squadrons under me, you know. So all the way 72. Now, it just so happened that my first marriage had dissolved, and I had found my lovely current bride, and we got married right about that same time frame. And so there we are now, 71 activated, December 71. So January, February, March of 1972, she and I got married. So then she came there to Spangdahlem with me. And I'm commander of the base. She's the first lady. First lady for the wing. And then we commenced to do that which is called, I think, procreation. I think is the word, procreation. And the first procreant, you didn't know there was a word called procreant. It was a dude named Larry H.T. Clifford.
Tell me about Larry.
And he came along in May of 1973, 1 year later. And then 1 year later after that, in May of 74, the number 2 Clifford offspring came, male, named Mark Brandon Clifford. So now Edie had a son from her previous marriage, so I had a stepson. Ed is about, 3 years older than you. About 3 years older, isn't he? Huh?
8 years.
Older?
Born in 65.
Oh, that's, yeah, 7, 8 years old. Yeah, 7, 8 years older, yeah. 65, yeah, that's right. So I had my wife and Eddie, little Eddie, big Eddie, and then Larry and Mark came along. They say, why did I go into all that? Will you ask me something?
I'll ask you about pinning stars.
Oh, yeah. So that's 72. Mark is born in 73. Mark is born in 74. It just so happened in late 73, mid 73 approximately, I came out on the general officer's promotion list from the commander of United States Air Forces in Europe, stationed at Wiesbaden Air Force Base, was a gentleman by the name of General Jones. Okay? David Jones was the commander-in-chief, we call it, of United States Air Forces in Europe, stationed at Wiesbaden Air Force Base. And, of course, he put in his recommendations for who he wanted to be promoted to general officer, and I made general officer at that point in time. That was in 73. And I'm not sure, I don't have exact details, but one of the people, in addition to my wife, who helped to pin me, was also my mother. My mother we flew her over to Germany so she could be there to pin me with my first star.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Upon getting promoted to Brigadier General, 1-star Brigadier General, there when I was at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany, that then required me to move to another assignment, to a general officer assignment. So I got reassigned to another base there in Germany called Simbach Air Base for the command that was over top of my wing and several wings. I became then the vice commander at that wing. The 2-star boss I had was General Gerardo. He was a 2-star that was in commander of 17th Air Force. So I went there in mid-73, and then mid-74 is when then the Air Force decided that I should be reassigned. And the commander-in-chief of the United States Air Forces in Europe, as I mentioned before, the one who had gotten me selected to be one of his new general officers, was General David C. Jones. He called me to his office at the headquarters in Wiesbaden. And he said, Tom, he says, I've got an assignment for you, a new assignment for you. Yes, sir. He says, I want you to go back to the States, to Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. Is it San Bernardino? Yeah. And I want you to become director of inspection at the Air Force Inspection and Safety Center, which was there. So 2 functions, director of safety and director of inspection. Inspection is, you hear the term IG, Inspector General. We're the ones that have to go and inspect all the units throughout the whole Air Force periodically, once a year ideally, to see if they're complying with all of the regulations and rules and everything they're supposed to do. You either non-conform or you don't. If you don't, you get a red mark. If you're conforming, you get a green mark, That's your report card. And the IG, the Inspector General, has that responsibility. So I got assigned then in 1974 to go to Norton Air Force Base as Director of Inspection as a 1-star general. So my wife and Larry and Mark, we moved to Norton Air Force Base. And that was a very challenging and rewarding assignment. I was there 2 years, and then I got reassigned. And the reassignment was really joyful by virtue of the fact that the individual who plucked me from there was, I'll be darned, Chappie James. You remember old Chappie James? General Daniel Chappie James. What had happened was Chappie James had been promoted to 4 stars. Chappie James was the commander of NORAD, North American Air Defense Command, there in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And he said, Clifford, I need you. And he selected me, brought me to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, not too far from Phoenix, as commander of the 27th Air Defense Command NORAD region, which is part of the whole air defense system for the United States of America. We had regions, we had about 5 or 6 regions, and I was commander of the 27th region. So he brought me there as a 1-star, and how sweet it was. So that would have been 1976. Well, what do you know? Lo and behold, a year later, was it 1 year later? Yeah, 1 year later, in 77, what do you know? I came out on the promotion list, general officer promotion list, for my 2nd star. Promoted to Major General. Woo! Thank the Lord. Thanks to Chappie James. He saw to it that happened. He got me promoted to my 2nd star. So that was at Norton, at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, near Phoenix, Arizona. What's the name of the town? Litchfield Park.
We got a pause.
Okay.
That's 64 gigs.
If I recall, the day I think I got promoted in 1977 to my Major General, 2nd star. And then I was there for a year. And then it necessitated a change of jobs, because I'm moving up to another level. So it was in 78 that I got reassigned to the Pentagon. And it was right about that time frame, 77, 78, I don't remember exactly what year and month, that General Chappie James, the one who promoted me, got me promoted to 2 stars. He passed away. He became ill and passed away. That was really sad to have him pass away on us. But anyway, I got reassigned to the Pentagon, and it happened to be to the very same job that I mentioned to you earlier that he had, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. In the Department of Defense, you have different departments, and civilians head them up. And the civilian boss, the civilian head of, who was the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, was a guy by the name of Tom Ross. He had come from the journalism side of the world. And so the deputy was a military guy, a 2-star. It happened to be my job. The same one Chappie had way back when, just so coincidentally. But anyway, so I'm there as a year in that job, and it's okay. It really wasn't much of a challenge, and I'm away from the Air Force per se. I'm away from flying per se. Of course, I still had to fly to get my hours in because I flew, lots of airplanes. But this is 70, that would have been 78, I got assigned there. So approximately a year later, a little bit over a year later, in the fall of 1979, it just so happened that General Motors Corporation, following on the heels of the Ford Motor Car Company, had started a minority for whatever reason, decided that they were going to get some minorities in some of their positions in the corporation. And out of the clear blue sky one day comes this young lady, Tony, Antoinette, what's her last name? I can't remember her last name. Anyway, she was a young, relatively young African-American woman who was given the job by General Motors Corporation in Detroit to seek minority talent to bring into the corporation. So she visited me there in the Pentagon that one day and told me what she was all about. And she said, "We'd like to have you consider coming to General Motors." And of course, I'm curious, how do you even know about me? Well, it is true that I did have publicity in Jet magazine. We had I don't even know if Jet magazine exists anymore, but Jet magazine would keep up with accomplishments of African Americans, So there was some publicity about me because of what I was accomplishing in the Air Force, And so she somehow had learned about me that way, I guess. And I said, well, let's see what you're talking about. So sure enough, we went out to the air base there and got an airplane, T-39. Used to fly T-39 Sabre jets. It's an executive jet, little twin-engine executive jet. It's fun to fly. Anyway, took an airplane and flew up to Detroit with her, and then went to visit some people there in General Motors, specifically in the Fisher Body Division. You got different divisions. Fisher Body Division was the well-known division in General Motors that came up with the bodies of cars and stuff like that. Anyway, those were the people that she took me to that division. And so they entertained me, and they said, hey, we'd have you take a look at our operation. And they then put me in their airplanes and flew me around to different places in the United States where they had their facilities, in addition to what was in Detroit. And so this went on for a couple of visits. And I'm interested enough to at least hear what they have to say. Long story short, I can remember it was a Friday evening, pretty much close of business time, and I'm going to return home, fly back to Washington that evening, and that's when top officials for Fisher Body Division, the boss's division chief, said, well, we'd like to offer you a position in General Motors Corporation. Oh, in what capacity? Said, well, you know, we have this plant called the Detroit Central Plants. It's really a conglomeration of 3 plants under one boss. And we'd like to bring you in as the assistant plant manager and, you know, pay you. And they offered salary. And I listened to them. And this is after having visited there in several plants I had visited by that point in time and seen the assembly operation making cars. I countered with, I said, well, thank you very much for the offer, but I really, really believe that I could effectively perform as a plant manager for you based upon the kinds of command experience and so forth I've had in the United States Air Force. I figured at that point, he'd say, oh, hey, goodbye. He said, well, hold tight. They left the room, left me in a room by myself, went back down to the hall to the boss's office, came back about 10, 15 minutes later. He said, okay, we have a new offer. We would like to offer to bring you on as plant manager of the Detroit Central plants. And they even boosted the salary another $1,000 or whatever, you know. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, thank you very much. It's very generous. Appreciate it. I said, please understand that I have to get consent from the Air Force before I can depart this Air Force and accept this position. So thank you very much. I'll let you know. Flew back to Washington that Friday night, and I'm saying to myself, maybe this is going to be the next chapter in Tom Clifford's life. That following Monday morning, I got an appointment with the Vice Commander of the United States Air Force, the 4-star general. I went and visited the general, and he said, yes, Clifford, what's up? What's up? I said, sir, I'd like to ask permission to retire from the United States Air Force. I have been offered a position in the General Motors Corporation, which I'm very enticed by, and I'd like to get your permission to leave the Air Force. Because at this point in time, I'm 29 years service at 30 years, coming up on 30 years service at that time, but there various things that I could be doing, and maybe even a possibility that I'm going to make a 3rd star, maybe even be a 4-star someday, But he said, oh, well, we don't want to lose you, Clifford. Well, I'll consider it, and I'll get back with you. Anyway, however many days expired, he had me to come back and visit with him. He said, okay, we'll consent to your retirement from the Air Force. So that's what happened. So in October 1979, I retired from the Air Force with 30 years service, because I entered in 49. I entered in, when did I enter the Air Force? 49. 50, 60, 79, 30 years. September, 30 years. And then immediately moved to Detroit, Michigan, moved the family, moved there, and I went to work for General Motors. that's when my wonderful military career ended, and I commenced a civilian career. It just so happened that when I went to General Motors, and for approximately a solid year and a couple of months, I was the plant manager for what they call the Detroit Central plants. Unique, really unique, the only plant of its kind in the whole General Motors Corporation. They were responsible for introducing the new cars that were being developed. When you come up with a new concept or whatever, they would bring it into the Detroit Central plants. That's where we had the people who design what they call the jigs and fixtures that you use to move the metal and put the metal in place and so forth and so on. It was the only place where you had one of the other plants, 3 plants. And the other plant was a plastics plant. That's where the plastic parts were made for the whole corporation. And then the third plant was called a pilot plant. And that's where you always have what you call a pilot program for a new car. You're bringing a brand new car into existence, then this is the place where we would put it together and then put it on display, and then all the hierarchy people in General Motors would come and view it, and boom, 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 engineers and technical people, finance people, so forth, so on, to try to see if everything's in order to introduce this car to the public and start producing the car, the pilot plant. Very unique, really unique job, you know. So, but I was there for 1 solid year. And then I got selected to become plant manager for the Fleetwood assembly plant. The Fleetwood assembly plant was the plant that assembled the bodies of Cadillac cars.
Oh, yeah.
All the Cadillac cars. Because you remember one of the Cadillac brands was called Fleetwood. And that was right there in Detroit, Michigan also. Right in Detroit. So I moved over and became plant manager for the Fleetwood plant. And did that for several years, quite a few years. And it just so happened, so that would have been the end of 1980, because I went there in late 79 and then got this assignment in approximately December of 1980. So then 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, right around 1986 time frame, it just so happened that General Motors was building a brand new Cadillac plant in an area close to Detroit, one of the suburbs of Detroit. And it was going to be a more advanced plant, obviously, because they were bringing all the new innovations and so forth. Well, young Tom Clifford isn't going to be selected for that prestigious job, which I would have loved to have gotten. But they had, in fact, the guy that I had succeeded at Fleetwood was the one who got selected to become the plant manager there. So now it was a matter of me saying, okay, now where can I go from here? Well, one of the things I really was seriously thinking about was I could offer my services to different positions in General Motors where having Defense Department experience that I had would be beneficial, because you always got a marriage with the military and the motor car companies, you know, obviously. So I knew there'd be some niches that I could fit in very neatly, because I'd be able to get into the bowels of the Pentagon and get access to the things they need to have and so forth. So that was kind of in my mind. But just coincidentally, at that point in time, I was the first, to my knowledge, as best, because General Motors is a huge corporation. In addition to Fisher Body Division, you got a lot of divisions. But as best I understood, I was the first African American to have the position of plant manager in the whole of General Motors Corporation. And okay, so now at this point in time, it just so happened that General Motors, just like Ford Motor Company, had made a decision because of the pressure from us minorities pressing for more acceptance in the society, blah, 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 decided, well, maybe we really ought to, maybe it's time to let some African Americans become dealers. Because there were no minority dealers in the car business, Chrysler, Ford, or General Motors, which were the big three. And so they started what was called a minority dealer training program. Lasted about 8 months approximately, something like that. And so a class commenced. I heard about that, and so I said, that's what I'm going to pursue, because I want to be a businessman anyway. I never have had a chance to be a businessman. I've been military all my life, plant manager, corporate world. So I entered what was the second minority dealer training program, because they had one this year, and then I got in the second one, which was the year, now we're talking about the year of 1987 approximately. Because my plant now is going to close in another couple of months anyway because of the new Cadillac plant. And I'm without a job, going to be without a job. So I go in a dealer training program. And what it was a class made up of minorities, Hispanic and African Americans, basically. And that's where they were teaching us how to be car dealers. So in addition to the ground school work, the academic work we had to do in class, we also were required to tie in with dealers in the Detroit area for whatever car company you were interested in. So Chevy dealer or Pontiac or Oldsmobile or Buick, Cadillac, whatever. I chose Cadillac because Cadillac's my bag, I've been making Cadillacs, right? So I tied in with what was then the biggest Cadillac dealer in Detroit, because I knew them all. And I went down and visited with him and said, sir, I'd like to come here and be an apprentice, a trainee, and receive hands-on training. So classroom and then down to the store. Every day, like I say, seems to me, if I remember correctly, we were about 6 months or so approximately in this training program, learning every aspect of how to run a dealership. Upon graduation from that, it was up to us, students, graduates, to find a dealership. A lot of people think, well, General Motors will give you a dealership, or Ford will give you got to find your own dealership. So that means you need to go out and locate some dealer who's willing to sell his dealership. So I went on the search right away. And there was one down in Southern Virginia. I'm an East Coast boy anyway, born and raised East Coast. And I went down there and visited with him, and this gentleman had the Cadillac dealership. His father was a dealer down in Florida, but for whatever reason, he was willing to sell this dealership here because he was going to relocate with his father. I wanted that dealership so bad because of location and blah, 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 whatever. Anyway, I came back to the headquarters in General Motors and asked permission from the people who have to give you permission if I could get it. They denied me that opportunity. They had some other ideas, or somebody else, It's not what you know, it's who you know. So that one went by the wayside. But then fortuitously, because of the experience I had had when I was stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, near Phoenix, Arizona, and the contacts and relations I had with certain key personnel from the civilian community, there was a guy there who we became good buddies. He was just a great guy. He called me on the phone. Of course, he kind of kept up with what I was doing and so forth. After all those years, I've been gone from Arizona. And he called me. He said, Tom. I said, yeah, hey, what's up? He said, I understand that you finished a dealer training program up there in Detroit. I said, yeah, I sure have. Now I'm trying to find a store, man. I need a dealership. He said, I've got an idea. There's one that is available. California, not far from here. I said, oh, where is it? He said, Blythe, California. I said, well, Blythe, I never heard of what Blythe, but whoever. How do you spell it? He said, there's a gentleman there who owns the dealership, had it for many years, Charlie Graham. He has a son who we all anticipated would take over the dealership, but Bird tells me that the son's not really that keen about becoming a dealer. It might be possible. Thank you. I got myself an airplane. I flew here to Blythe, California. I visited with Mr. Charlie Graham. He's an elderly fellow. I'd say he's probably in his 70s or so, approximately. He's just ready to retire, He had the dealership for umpteen years, many years, maybe the first one ever in Blythe, I don't know, of a Cadillac, of a General Motors store. We hit a deal off. Then I had to have the right people in General Motors at the hierarchy to come, and they had to come and bless. They always have to bless the deal because they're investing with you at the same time. I can only put up what I've got in the bank account, which is as much as we were required to save every penny we could. So we'd have maximum to put into this purchase. But then whatever we couldn't put up, they would give to me as a loan, which I have to pay them back at General Motors. Anyway, we struck a deal. And that's when I acquired the dealership here in Blythe, California, and renamed it Clifford Motors Incorporated. And we had 5 General Motors franchises in this store. I had Chevy, Pontiac, Buick, Olds, and Cadillac, which you can do in a small town, have them all. Yeah. Most times you only have 1 or 2, I had all 5 franchises. And so I became a dealer. Freshly out of the GM minority training program. And I was one of the first, I don't remember exact number, but one of the first African-American dealers in the United States of America. Didn't have very many. They were just starting. Yeah. Ford was running a little ahead of General Motors about a year or so because I got to meet some there in Detroit, Michigan. So they were kind of a little bit ahead, but GM was catching up, So that's when that came about, where dealers were allowed to be minorities, non-white.
So I'm going to ask.
Work-wise.
Anything-wise.
Work-wise, that military career of 30 years, fantastic. My 7 years or whatever it was that I had the dealership here in Blythe before I sold it, fantastic. Those are my 2 major accomplishments, major experiences. That consumed my life, Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's no question but that I certainly encourage if I remember my count correctly, I've got 9. We have a total of 9 grandkids, and we have 6 great-grandkids. I think I have the number correctly. And, of course, I would encourage all of them to be true to themselves and be honest. And be loving and tolerant of others. And work hard at whatever tasks they're given to do, professional or otherwise. Do your best. Take pride in being the best that you can be, because that then benefits others in addition to benefiting yourself. And of course I do encourage them to believe in God, because it's from Him that we receive everything. And so religious belief is important also.
I forgot to answer the question, Dad. Who is your favorite child? The firstborn of your...
Yeah, Maria. Her name's Maria. My daughter, Maria.
Whatever.
She's the eldest.
Yes.
Thank God for her. She keeps these guys in line,